If you're hiking one of your first 14ers this year, you're going to want to watch this video. Hi, I'm Catherine. I'm the personal trainer and running coach at Kathletics. Here at Kathletics, we're all about meeting you where you are in your fitness so you can approach hypertraining in a sustainable way. 14ers are some of the most incredible experiences you can have here in Colorado, especially as somebody who is a hiker and or avid trail enthusiast. When I first started getting into 14ers, I actually didn't live here. I was still in Nebraska, where I was born and raised, and I already had a base of fitness. But it's different when you live at probably 1,000 feet above sea level versus being at 14,000 feet. So, the first time that I ever did it, I went with my boyfriend and some other family friends that were also visiting Denver. It was Labor Day weekend, and that is when basically the 14er season starts to come to a close because things start to get a little colder and the snow starts to pick up as September goes on. So, starting before we even began the hike, I was not prepared whatsoever. I didn't have the right gear, I didn't have the right equipment, I didn't have the right attire. I basically went in what I would go to the gym with, so leggings, and then I borrowed my sister's fleece North Face zip up, which, as you know, those are not windproof. They might be cozy for when you're in a chilly room, but not when you're at 14,000 feet. So when I was doing this hike, well, as you guessed it, I was absolutely freezing. I didn't have the right hat. I had like a stocking cap that was not meant for other types of weather. Same with the gloves. I did not have a rain jacket or windbreaker or anything like that that was going to be potentially helpful for me when you're up in the middle of nowhere with no trees or anything like that stopping wind from hitting you. So, although it was absolutely beautiful, it was not a great time because I wasn't prepared. I didn't know what I was getting myself into. We didn't look at the weather ahead of time. And so we basically just went up the mountain. It was very challenging. And then I didn't even summit. I was probably a few hundred feet from the top, and I was just so cold to the bone that we just turned around. It also started to snow and hail on us on the way down, which was, of course, a fun time. Looking back on it, honestly, it was a great experience, but it could have been really unsafe because when you're up at that high of altitude, things could go wrong very quickly. So that was in 2016. So this is actually even before I became a trainer or like dove further into the realm of fitness. I was definitely strength training. I did have some cardiovascular fitness, but again, it was nothing that prepared me for a 14er. Fast forward a few years, we moved to Colorado and redeemed ourselves. We went back to Mount Bierstadt. That's where the first 14er took place. Much better. Actually, that was actually in October, and it hadn't been snowing. So 2 thumbs up for that. But now, after having several years of fitness underneath my belt and getting more into the outdoor scene with hiking and other trail adventures, I want to help you not have to go through what I went through in 2016. So first things first, when you're looking at 14er season, we are primarily looking at like the middle to end of June to the beginning of September. So it's a very short time frame because if you are unaware, it can snow up there at any time of the year. Of course, you have the winter season where you're going to have more of like avalanche risk, things like that. But by mid-June, usually, it has run off a bit more and trails are a bit drier. You may experience a little bit of snow up top, but that's why it's important to look at the peak conditions on 14ers.com, which we'll get into a little bit later. So right now it is May. And again, if you're watching this video at a different time, that's okay. But understand that really we should be training as soon as we can to get prepared for those high altitude hikes. First things first, you of course want to get your cardiovascular fitness into check. So you can do this in many different ways. You can do this by running, cycling, hiking, and getting other types of cardiovascular fitness in. What I would focus on is building up your base, especially if you're new to cardio and if you're new to getting high altitude hiking in. And then from there, I would also focus on increasing your elevation gain over time. Now, I understand that everybody has access to trails or access to high altitude hikes in general. So that is when it's important to do things that are going to mimic hiking, such as step ups or the Stairmaster or things like that that are going to allow you to get that motion of walking up and down, especially at steep inclines, because that ultimately is what is happening over a short distance. You are at high altitude and it's generally a pretty steep incline. So you'll want to place these cardiovascular sessions throughout your week. I would aim for between 3 and 4 sessions a week, again, if you are just starting out. Now, these are things that are programmed for you in our 14er program. So if you want to check that out, please click the link in the description below. We have both a beginner program and an intermediate program based on your level of fitness. Number 2, you want to make sure that you're strength training. Now, of course, personal trainer talking about strength training. What a surprise. This is really important, especially if you don't have access to getting to trails. We need to be strengthening your legs, strengthening your upper body, and making sure that you are ready to go for not only life, but also the mountains that you're going to climb in high altitudes. If you're looking for some structure around that, I would recommend looking at Sustainably Fit or our Kathletics Trail program. Both of these programs are going to be suited for those who are wanting to get out and hike, get on the trails. The Sustainably Fit program is going to be more of a beginner base versus the trail program is going to be more intermediate. So keep that in mind when you are choosing between those two programs. Again, those are linked in the description below. Number 3 is going to be fueling and hydration. You must fuel regularly and stay hydrated regularly, especially when you're at that higher altitude, because altitude sickness is a real thing. It can basically end your hike if it gets bad. So you want to make sure that you're staying on top of these things. And it's also important to note that even if you are fueling and hydrating, you still can suffer from altitude sickness. So it's important that we stay on top of it, so then we can at least mitigate some of those symptoms if you do experience it. But aside from the altitude sickness, we do want to make sure that fueling and hydrating is happening frequently and throughout the day that you're on the mountain, because ultimately you may be on the mountain for several hours. So you need to take that into consideration as you are planning what needs to go in your pack and how long you're going to be on the mountain. So that's kind of the preparation part that you need to think about prior to getting on the mountain. Now, when it comes to gear and equipment, this is where you're going to want to have a plethora of things in your backpack. First things first, you want to make sure that you have enough layers for when you are on the mountain. So this is thinking both base layer, mid layer, outer layer. We're talking windbreaker. Depending on the time of year and depending on what the weather is, you may even have a puffy or something that you can both stuff in your backpack or just keep on, because it's going to be chilly at the top. There's no trees to stop the wind from coming in. So you want to have something available that's going to keep you warm, both on your body, but also your head, your hands, and your legs. Depending on how you feel with comfort, I prefer wearing trail running shoes. How cringe is that? I know. But I prefer wearing trail running shoes versus hiking boots. I used to wear hiking boots, but they are much heavier. So it just depends on what you feel comfortable with, how your ankle stability is, if you feel more stable in a boot versus a shoe. Other things that you're going to want to have are a buff, sunscreen, sunglasses, headlamp, map, satellite communication device. I personally use the Garmin InReach. They actually don't make the model that I have anymore. Mine's like a brick, but I do recommend getting some sort of satellite communication device and know how to use it. It is there for you if you absolutely need it. Hopefully you don't, but it is always good to have an option. I personally would not rely on a cell phone, even though a lot of phones now have the SOS option. I just don't want to have to rely on that because the battery of the InReaches or other satellite communication devices are just so much longer than what your phone can last, especially when it's cold temperatures. You'll of course want to have all of the 10 essentials. These are all listed within my free 14er guide, so I highly recommend downloading that if you haven't already. And of course, having your ID and credit card on you. As you're leading into your hike, you want to make sure that you are feeling prepared safety-wise as well. So as I mentioned, 14er season is primarily during those summer months, so between mid-June and mid-September. And you want to make sure that you're starting your hike early enough, so I mean early, so you can get back before those thunderstorms roll in, because pretty much most days of summer, there are going to be thunderstorms that roll in, even as early as 11 a.m. But of course, you can take a look at the weather ahead of time. I look at NOAA, Mountain Forecast, and Open Summit. So all of those are great options for you to use as a resource. I also recommend looking at 14ers.com because they'll always have the most recent conditions that people put in on forums. Another big safety tip that I recommend is knowing what your body's limit is and also not being afraid to turn around. The mountains aren't going anywhere. If you're not feeling it today, something feels off, things aren't going well, turn around, it'll still be there for another time. It is not worth taking the risk. And lastly, I highly recommend leaving your hiking details with at least 1 to 2 people. That gives an entire breakdown of where you're going, what you're wearing, where your car is parked, what your car details are. what time you're going to be starting, what time you think that you'll be finishing, and who to contact if you have not contacted them by the time that you have listed. So that means search and rescue. What search and rescue number or local authorities do they need to call in order to get you help? Doing this one step can literally save your life. So I highly recommend taking it seriously and telling people where you are going. Now, I know that was a lot of information, and I understand that it seems really daunting based on what I'm sharing, especially with the safety tips, but what you are planning on doing is a really big deal, and you need to make sure that you're taking the precautions in order to be prepared and feel good as you're hiking that day. As I mentioned earlier, if you are a beginner or intermediate hiker and you are planning to do a 14er this summer, I highly recommend joining one of our training programs, be it just the cardio portion, so our 14er programs, or joining trail or sustainably fit that is going to include those programs. Highly recommend joining those so you can feel prepared and confident to go summit those peaks. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. Otherwise, be sure to like, subscribe, and then we'll see you in the next one.